Hey guys, tonight we drift out beneath a Persian sky so wide it makes you feel like a grain of sand that forgot where it belongs. The wind is warm, brushing against your skin like a slow exhale from the earth itself. You taste dust on your lips, and the horizon glows with the faint afterburn of a sun that refuses to let go. You can almost hear it, heat sighing across the dunes, daring you to dream of something cold. Because out here, in the middle of a desert so vast it humbles every drop of water, someone once figured out how to make ice cream. Yes, frozen dessert in a land that laughs at rain. And you probably wouldn't survive this journey without melting first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world we're cooling off together. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking, sand crunching under your sandals, the moon shining silver on endless dunes. Every few steps you imagine the absurdity of it all. Someone, thousands of years ago, decided that life in the desert wasn't hot enough already. They looked to the barren wasteland and thought, yeah, let's make frozen dessert happen. It sounds impossible, right? But the ancient Persians, around 400 BCE, give or take a historian's headache, built structures so clever that they could store ice, harvested from mountaintops, through an entire summer. These massive, dome-shaped refrigerators were called yakchals, which literally translates to ice pit. And they were monumental, often as tall as a modern 4-story building, rising from the earth like clay beehives sculpted by gods who hated sweating. You imagine standing before one, mud brick walls thick enough to stop a camel's breath, curved like the shell of a sleeping giant. The air inside drops from blistering heat to crisp coolness the moment you step in. A little shiver runs through your spine, not from the temperature, but from awe. This isn't technology from a frozen kingdom. This is desert magic, engineered by patience and geometry. As you move closer, the desert hum fades, replaced by a low, steady stillness. You can hear the faint echo of water dripping deep inside. Somewhere down there lies the ice, the heart of the operation. The Persians didn't just store cold, they manufactured it. Using a blend of mud, straw, wind channels, and the occasional goat laborer, they learned to coax frost into existence. And here's your first quirky fact. Some historians believe they didn't even need mountain ice every year. In the right conditions, clear skies, still nights, shallow pools, they could make ice right in the desert. How? By harnessing radiative cooling. It's the same reason your car roof frosts over while the air still feels above freezing. The ancient Persians simply weaponized it. Imagine a night so still you can hear your own pulse. Shallow stone basins filled with water spread out under the stars. The desert air, bone dry, drinks up every whisper of heat radiating from the water's surface. By dawn, there's ice. Thin, fragile, miraculous. Workers break it up, carry it to the yakchal, and stack it like treasure under layers of straw and insulation. No electricity, no freon, just physics and faith. Historians still argue whether these ice-making basins were widespread or reserved for elite estates. Some say every city had its freezing fields. Others insist it was a royal luxury, supervised by priests who claimed the gods had gifted the night's breath to their king. You can picture it. An early morning procession, under pale light, men hauling blocks of glittering ice like sacred offerings. You kneel down now, brushing your fingers through the sand. Even this, the endless grit, played its part. The yakchal builders used a particular mixture of clay, sand, egg whites, and lime to create a waterproof, heat-resistant plaster called sarouge. It's the ancient equivalent of insulation foam, but way cooler, pun intended. That sarouge coat kept the inner chambers dry and reflective, bouncing away heat like a well-trained mirror. There's something strangely meditative about this. You're standing in one of the hottest environments on Earth, learning about people who refused to surrender to it. It's the same stubborn spark that drives humans to light fires in rain or grow gardens on rooftops. The Persians didn't fight the desert, they collaborated with it, listened to it, negotiated a truce. A warm gust brushes past you, carrying hints of dust, date palms, and something faintly floral, rose water. You'll come back to that later when dessert enters the picture. But for now, you're still outside, tracing shadows. The stars shimmer above you, scattered like shards of ancient ice across the black dome of the night. You can almost imagine a whisper from the past. Don't fear the heat, just outsmart it. And maybe that's why this story still feels so modern. Even today, scientists studying sustainable cooling systems point back to these designs. Passive architecture, natural ventilation, thermal mass, all of it has roots here. The Yakchal wasn't just a cooler, it was a philosophy built into clay. Still, you wonder about the people who actually worked here, the ones who rose before dawn to chip frost off mountain slopes, or who trudged barefoot through salt plains carrying bundles of straw and buckets of mud. Maybe one of them, somewhere between exhaustion and pride, realized they were part of something timeless, a secret recipe for survival disguised as dessert prep. You smile at the thought. Imagine explaining your job to someone today. So, what do you do? Oh, I make ice in the desert. Sure, pal. And I harvest Wi-Fi in the rainforest. The desert wind laughs softly at your joke, as if approving. As you step inside the Yakchal shadow, the air tightens, cooler, denser, deliciously dry. You breathe it in and instantly feel the contrast. Outside, the heat still rages. Inside, the temperature drops like a sigh of relief. It's not the artificial chill of an air conditioner. It's something deeper, earthier, honest. You close your eyes, listening. Somewhere beneath your feet, the remnants of old ice may still sleep in forgotten layers of dust. Or maybe it's gone, melted into memory. Historians still argue whether any original Yakchals remain with intact cooling pits. Some swear there are, hidden in remote Iranian villages. Others think only the shells remain, beautiful, hollow ghosts of refrigeration's ancestors. Either way, you feel like you're standing at the crossroads of ancient science and quiet wonder. Every detail, the curvature of the dome, the angle of the walls, the alignment with prevailing winds, tells a story of obsession, of people who refused to let the desert decide what was possible. And as the night deepens, you realize something poetic. The same sky that froze their ice is freezing your thoughts now. The stars above aren't just decoration, they're accomplices in the world's oldest cooling trick. You tilt your head back, exhaling into the chill. Somewhere in the dark, a jackal calls out, maybe laughing at you for romanticizing sand and mud. But you don't mind. You're already hooked, halfway between history and dream, ready to dive deeper into the icy heart of Persia. Because the real wonder hasn't even started yet. You've seen the outside. Next, you'll step inside the beehive, into the silent, engineered cool that defied the desert sun. You step fully into the Yakchal, and the world changes. The air feels heavier, almost reverent, like you've entered the chest cavity of a sleeping giant. Your breath turns audible, slow and echoing. The dome above you swirls up toward a point that vanishes into shadow. Ribs of brick spiraling like frozen waves. There's no wind here, just a deep, cooling stillness. You touch the wall. It's cool. Impossibly so, given the inferno outside. The clay feels alive, almost sweating backward, pulling heat out of you, offering calm in return. This is the Yakchal, the ice beehive. And honestly, the nickname fits perfectly. The Persians weren't just building storage, they were sculpting air, trapping the desert's breath in mathematical stillness. You imagine hundreds of hands shaping each brick by hand, stacking them layer after layer, tilting them just so to catch the right currents. There's something hypnotic about it. If you stand still long enough, you can almost hear them again, The whispers of workers, the scrape of trowels, the murmur of engineers arguing over angles and airflow. The magic of the Yakchal lies in its simplicity. Warm air rises, cold air sinks. The dome's design exaggerates that rule. The narrow vent at the top acts as a natural chimney, sucking out hot air. Down below, a subterranean chamber, sometimes 10 meters deep, holds ice blocks and chilled water. The walls, thick as small cars, are made of saroj, that special waterproof plaster of lime, clay, ash, egg whites, and goat hair. Yes, goat hair, because apparently every good Persian invention involves at least one slightly bewildered goat. The mixture resists heat, water, even salt corrosion. Modern engineers have tested samples and found them almost as durable as concrete. It's kind of mind-blowing. 2,400 years before insulation foam, people were already out here cooking up eco-friendly supermaterials with farm ingredients. Historians still argue whether the Yakchal's dome was purely functional or symbolic. Some say it was shaped to mimic Mount Damavand, the sacred peak of Persian mythology, where legends say a dragon was chained beneath the ice. Others think the dome was just the most efficient way to balance pressure and temperature. Either way, it's a masterpiece of design, half architecture, half poetry. As you wander deeper, you notice how the sound changes. Your footsteps echo differently in each curve. That's not an accident either. The Persians used acoustic testing long before microphones, listening for how sound bounced inside the dome to detect cracks or weak points. They didn't just build by sight or plan, they built by ear. Down at the base, a narrow tunnel curves away into darkness. You duck your head and follow it, because of course you do. You're the kind of person who clicks watch until the end even when your phone's battery's at 3%. The air gets even cooler as you descend. The walls here are rougher, carved straight from the earth. This is where the magic culminates, the ice chamber. Imagine the process. At night, workers dump in freshly harvested ice, sometimes mixed with straw or sawdust for insulation. During the day, the massive dome above reflects sunlight away, while the thick saroj shell slows heat transfer. Beneath your feet, the desert's own cool underbelly absorbs the rest. The result is ice, stable, stubbornly solid, even as temperatures outside soar above 40 degrees Celsius. It's like a natural thermos bottle the size of a small temple. And in a way, it was a temple to the art of control, to human refusal. You can almost hear the desert muttering, "Fine, keep your ice cream. See if I care." The Yakchal wasn't just for ice, though. It was a community resource. Cities like Yazd, Kerman, and Kashan had public Yakchals, often built near qanats, those underground aqueducts that channeled mountain water across miles of sand. The qanat system itself was another stroke of Persian genius, gravity-fed tunnels carrying cool water to farms and homes without a single pump. When the qanat water passed near or under a Yakchal, it helped lower the internal temperature even more. You're looking at ancient climate control, version 1.0. And here's the quirky tidbit of the night. Some Yakchals doubled as date coolers. Merchants stored dried fruits and nuts alongside ice, believing the subtle humidity improved flavor. There's even a 10th century poem that praises a merchant's dates chilled by the sigh of the earth. The Persians didn't just engineer their environment, they romanticized it. You stop for a moment, tracing a small crack in the wall. It's filled with pale dust, soft as talc. You wonder how many summers it's endured. Maybe hundreds, maybe more. Some of these structures are still standing after 2 millennia, which is more than you can say for half the stuff built last decade. Looking at you, apartment drywall. A sudden draft slips past your neck. Cool, directional. You look up and notice a slit of moonlight filtering through a vent. That's part of the bodgear, or wind catcher system. These vertical shafts, often built adjacent to the dome, channeled prevailing winds down into the interior while venting out hot air. Think of them as 5th century air conditioning. You can still see bodgears today on traditional Iranian rooftops, like tall, elegant chimneys sliced open at the top. Historians still argue whether these wind catchers evolved independently or were inspired by Egyptian designs. Some claim the Persians invented them first. Others insist it was a shared innovation carried by traders across the ancient world. What's clear is Persia perfected the system, turning wind and geometry into refrigeration, before the word even existed. You tilt your head back again, staring up into the swirling darkness of the dome. It's almost hypnotic. Every curve, every vent, every brick obeys a logic older than language, but as modern as physics. The deeper you look, the more you realize this isn't primitive architecture. It's a love letter to thermodynamics. There's a faint, sweet scent in the air now. Maybe rosewater residue from centuries ago. Maybe your imagination. The Persians used to store flavored ice here too. Falude, sharbat, desserts meant for royal banquets and midsummer weddings. But you're not there yet. For now, you're still learning how the freezer works. You lean against the inner wall, closing your eyes. The quiet hum of the earth below feels steady, almost like breathing. You think of how fragile this must have seemed back then, balancing climate, manpower, and time. Yet somehow, it worked. Long before Newton, long before refrigeration patents and coolant gases, people here turned wind, clay, and shadow into comfort. Maybe that's the most beautiful part, how unassuming it looks from the outside. A lump of mud in the desert, a giant hive abandoned by bees. But inside, it's a monument to everything clever about being human. The will to make comfort where none should exist. You chuckle softly. Eat your heart out, modern refrigerators. The Yakchal doesn't hum, doesn't buzz, doesn't leak coolant. It just exists, timeless and efficient. Even your frigid home would be jealous. Outside, the dawn begins to stir, and the first sliver of sun peeks over the dunes. You feel it immediately. The temperature shifts. Yet inside the dome, the chill holds firm. The walls seem to sigh in defiance. You whisper, almost respectfully, "Well played, Persia." Then you step out of the shadow into the rising light, ready to see how these people didn't just store cold, but created it from thin air. You step back into the desert dawn, the horizon still half asleep and pink like the underside of a seashell. The heat hasn't yet pounced. It lingers in the wings, waiting for the sun to climb higher before it attacks. And here you are, squinting at a world that somehow managed to make its own winter. You've seen the beehive-shaped vault that kept the cold in, but now you're curious about how they got it there in the first place. Because let's be honest, making ice in the desert still sounds like a practical joke from the gods. The Persians, however, didn't rely on divine miracles. They had physics and a knack for coaxing nature to cooperate. You walk toward a shallow, rectangular depression in the ground, a stone basin maybe 30 meters long, framed by low mud walls. It doesn't look like much, but at night, this is where the real sorcery happened. The principle is deceptively simple. Heat radiates upward into the cold night sky. When there's no wind, no clouds, and low humidity, surfaces facing the open sky lose heat faster than they absorb it. The Persians knew this intuitively, long before anyone started throwing around words like radiative cooling. They exploited that trick to freeze water on demand. Here's how it worked. At sunset, they'd fill these shallow basins with a thin layer of water. The basins were often placed near the Yakchal or dug slightly below ground level to shelter them from stray breezes. As night deepened, the air above the water stayed warmer, but the open surface radiated heat directly into the black sky,
cooling fast enough that the top layer froze. By dawn, a sheet of ice shimmered across the basin. Workers would carefully break it up, haul it into baskets, and carry it into the ice vaults before the sun woke fully. You crouch beside one of these ancient basins, dry now, filled with sand, and imagine that moment before sunrise. Men and women working in silence, their breath visible in the cold air, hands numb but proud. The first rays of light spill across the desert, catching on slabs of freshly harvested ice. It must have looked like treasure, like a sunrise made solid. You can't help smiling. It's such a wonderfully rebellious thing to do, to outsmart the environment instead of surrendering to it. It's almost cheeky. You imagine the first person who figured it out, maybe a farmer who noticed his water trough icing over one unusually clear winter night, maybe a curious child poking a frozen puddle and thinking, we could use this. Either way, it was pure desert alchemy. The process wasn't perfect, though. Too much wind and the water wouldn't freeze, too many clouds and the radiative cooling failed. That's why these basins were often built near walls that blocked the north wind while leaving the south sky open. In a sense, each site was a tiny weather lab. Historians still argue whether these ice-making yards were government-controlled or community-run. Some claim the state oversaw production and distribution, rationing ice like gold. Others believe neighborhood groups, farmers, artisans, even families worked them collectively. One Persian text hints at ice guilds, responsible for night freezing and summer sale, suggesting an early form of unionized refrigeration. You stand and brush sand from your knees, thinking, people once had ice economies. Imagine the price fluctuations. Oh, sorry, we had too many cloudy nights. Ice prices are up 20%. You chuckle. Somewhere, an ancient economist probably had a panic attack about supply and demand graphs drawn on clay tablets. Still, it worked. Year after year, ice formed quietly in the dark while the rest of the city slept. It was stored, sold, and savored in every possible way, from cooling drinks to preserving food to creating what might be the world's first frozen dessert. But hold that thought, you'll taste it later. For now, look closer at this alchemy. The basins were lined with the same sarouge plaster used in the yakchal, ensuring minimal heat transfer. Sometimes they were connected directly to qanats, those underground water tunnels you heard about earlier. Water flowed in at night and drained by morning, ready to refill for the next freezing session. It was a perfect cycle. Zero waste, zero pollution, just timing and patience. A small lizard darts across the basin, its feet barely touching the surface of sand. You can almost hear it scolding you for interrupting its morning commute. You grin and whisper, "Don't worry, buddy. I'm just admiring ancient air conditioning." There's something almost musical about how these systems interacted. Windcatchers singing above, qanats whispering below, basins freezing under stars, domes humming with cold. The desert became an orchestra of temperature, every element playing its part. And here's a fun fringe theory. Some modern researchers propose that Persians might have experimented with saltwater brine in these basins to accelerate freezing. By evaporating the brine overnight and reusing it, they could have boosted ice formation rates even in marginal conditions. There's no definitive proof. Historians still argue whether that's chemistry or wishful thinking, but it's exactly the kind of experimental mindset Persia was famous for. You imagine a scientist from that era, beard full of dust, muttering equations to himself while fiddling with clay jars and salt crystals. The same curiosity that built astronomical observatories and wing catchers might have also led to the first backyard ice lab. By now the sun is up, painting the world in fierce gold. The basin glows like molten metal, and you squint through the glare. It's getting too hot to stand still, so you move toward a cluster of palm trees shading a small canal. This would have been one of those qanat channels, the arteries feeding the whole operation. You kneel and imagine the cool trickle that once ran here, carried from mountains dozens of kilometers away. Some qanats stretched over 50 kilometers, hand-dug tunnels with perfect gradient control, maintained by generations of laborers. A miscalculation of even a few centimeters could ruin the entire flow. Think about that. They did this without GPS, lasers, or even modern compasses, just rope, plumb lines, and infinite stubbornness. If engineering had a religion, this would have been its first holy site. You sip from your canteen, the water lukewarm but suddenly precious. You picture the Persians sipping something similar, only theirs might have been cooled by stored ice served in silver cups during royal banquets. The luxury of cold water, something you take for granted, was once a miracle worth building cities around. The more you think about it, the more you realize how much of ancient life revolved around temperature. Cold wasn't just comfort, it was control, preservation, prestige. It separated the ordinary from the divine, and the people who mastered it, the builders of the Yakchals, were like magicians cloaked in dust. A warm breeze brushes against your neck again, carrying the faint smell of date palms and smoke. Somewhere nearby, a cooking fire is being stoked. You imagine someone centuries ago doing the same, boiling syrup, steeping rose petals, waiting for the night's ice to arrive. The scent of sweet things floats just at the edge of your imagination, teasing you toward what's coming next. You pause and let the desert sounds wash over you. Wind sighing through reeds, a camel groaning in protest, distant bells jingling. The world is alive again, sunlit and loud. You can almost hear time moving. The Persians didn't fight this landscape, they befriended it. They learned when to rest, when to build, when to harvest ice, and when to let the heat win. You feel like you've just uncovered a forgotten rhythm, a climate lullaby whispered through sand. If you listen closely enough, it says, "Patience makes the impossible ordinary." You grin. Not bad advice for life, or for dessert, because the next step of this journey isn't about ice anymore. It's about what happens when humans get creative with it, when science meets sugar under the desert sun.
You follow the faint outline of a trail curving away from the freezing basins, heading east toward the mountains that slice the horizon. The path is old, ruts carved into stone by countless hooves and cartwheels. This, you realize, is one of the ice highways, the arteries that once fed Persia's frozen dreams. You picture a line of camels swaying gently under starlight, each one burdened with a precious cargo wrapped in straw and burlap, chunks of mountain ice, shimmering faintly in the moonlight like stolen pieces of winter. The air is still cool from night, and the sand crunches under your sandals. You imagine walking beside those ancient caravans, feeling the quiet focus in the air. The desert is never truly silent. It hums with the memory of everything it's seen. But the ice traders move without chatter. Sound carries too far in the dark. They know this route like an old story, every dune and rock a verse. By day, the heat would make such journeys impossible. That's why they traveled mostly at night, guided by starlight and instinct. You squint upward, the same constellations they saw still hang above, though the world beneath has changed. Somewhere up there, Orion's belt twinkles faintly, and you wonder if ancient traders gave it another name, perhaps the Cold Three or the Guardians of Ice. A camel snorts behind your imagination, and you almost turn. The image is so vivid it feels real. You picture the handlers, wrapped in heavy cloaks despite the desert night, whispering to their animals, soothing them with rhythmic hums. The ice blocks, insulated in straw, sweat slowly, tiny rivulets forming that freeze again before dawn. The Persians were master logisticians long before that word existed. They didn't just harvest or store ice. They moved it across hundreds of kilometers through one of the harshest climates on Earth. And here's the mainstream historical fact. Records from the Achaemenid Empire mentioned ice storage near Persepolis, and later texts describe organized routes from the Zagros Mountains to desert cities. Some scholars even compare it to the Roman ice trade that came centuries later, but Persia did it first, and arguably smarter. They used wind, geometry, and timing, not slave galleys or imported snow. The journey wasn't just practical, it was almost ceremonial. Ice symbolized luxury, purity, even divine approval. Kings would receive it as tribute. Festivals were timed around its arrival. In some cities, the first delivery of the season was greeted like a parade, with musicians and perfumed garlands. You imagine standing by the city gate, watching the caravan approach at dawn, everyone craning to see if this year's harvest survived the trip. The desert wind shifts, and you feel that imagined excitement rise through you. Still, it wasn't always smooth sailing, or smooth trudging, rather. Camels were strong, but even they struggled under the weight of ice, which had to be carefully balanced to avoid cracking. Some routes used ox-drawn sledges over compacted salt flats, where the surface stayed cooler at night. Others relied on shaded rest stops, sometimes dug into cliffs or underground to preserve what little chill they could. You pass a low hill that hides a depression at its base. It looks unremarkable, just another dip in the landscape. But this could have been one of those midway vaults, a pit stop for ice caravans. Workers would stack spare ice here, rewrap it in straw, and wait for nightfall before continuing. A few fragments of broken pottery peek from the soil, and you pick one up, a piece of ancient amphora, maybe once filled with date syrup or rose water. You turn it over in your hand, feeling time's sandpaper texture. You think about the lives built around this trade. There must have been entire professions, ice harvesters, haulers, brokers, and cooks specializing in frozen delicacies. A whole economic microcosm quietly thriving between mountain frost and desert fire. You almost laugh at the absurdity, an industry devoted to something that melts. Historians still argue whether the ice caravans were seasonal government enterprises or private ventures. Some claim royal oversight. Persian kings loved control, especially over luxury goods. Others suggest merchant families competed fiercely for exclusive rights, guarding their routes and techniques like state secrets. There are even tales of caravan sabotage, competitors sneaking into rival camps to break ice blocks or poke holes in straw wrappings. Imagine being an ancient corporate spy, except instead of stealing blueprints, you're just melting the competition. You wipe sweat from your forehead, the sun finally catching up to you. The first heat waves shimmer above the sand, distorting the horizon like rippling glass. You can almost hear the ice sighing in those long-ago bundles, fighting to hold form. To preserve their cargo, some traders used clever tricks, traveling beside Kanat channels to benefit from their cool microclimate, or packing ice with charcoal layers to reduce heat transfer. Yes, charcoal, because apparently the desert's favorite cooling accessory was the same thing you now use for summer barbecues. You grin. Ancient Persians were basically the OG refrigeration engineers. A hawk circles high above, its shadow sliding silently across the dunes. You imagine it watching over those caravans centuries ago, following them instinctively for days. Perhaps even the wildlife learned the rhythm of the ice routes. And here's the fringe tidbit. A few archaeologists claim to have found what they call ice stones, porous mineral blocks used to stabilize melting rates inside transport crates. The theory is that these stones absorbed condensation, preventing rapid thawing. No consensus exists, and skeptics call it romantic archaeology. But it's just the kind of odd detail you secretly hope is true, because who doesn't want to believe someone invented ice pillows 3,000 years ago? You stop at a high ridge and look back. The desert stretches endlessly, dotted with mirages. Somewhere behind you, a yakshal gleams faintly, its dome defying the sun. Ahead, the mountains loom, their peaks faintly dusted with snow even now. That's where the ice began, where teams of men and donkeys carved out frozen slabs from high-altitude ponds each winter. You picture them chipping away with bronze tools, wrapping the blocks in reed mats, chanting softly against the cold. Every step down from those peaks was a battle between time and heat. Every dune crossed was a gamble. But they kept doing it, century after century, because the reward wasn't just refreshment, it was prestige. To serve chilled rosewater to a guest in midsummer was an act of hospitality bordering on divine. As you start walking again, you imagine arriving with the caravan at a desert city near dusk. The gates swing open, crowds gather. The handlers unload their ice into the local yakshaw, sealing the dome like a treasure vault. By nightfall, the air near it turns cool again, like the city is exhaling relief. Inside some courtyard nearby, torches flicker, and a cook begins preparing faluda, Persia's legendary frozen dessert, made from thin rice noodles, syrup, and rosewater. You'll get there soon. For now, you just watch the last bits of sunlight fade, knowing that night will bring another harvest of frost and another caravan ready to defy logic. The desert never truly sleeps, it just changes color. And so did its people. Farmers turned into ice traders, builders turned into alchemists, dreamers turned into scientists before the word even existed. You take one last glance toward the snowy peaks and whisper, half to yourself, half to the ghosts of those ancient travelers, you carried winter across fire. And somewhere in that endless horizon, the wind answers, not cold, but cool enough to make you believe. You find yourself standing at the edge of a courtyard, the air fragrant with sugar, citrus, and rosewater. The heat is still sharp, it presses down like a weight, but inside the shaded compound it feels almost bearable. You can hear laughter, metal bowls clinking, and a rhythmic scraping sound. You step closer and there it is, a wide bronze basin, half filled with crushed ice and hands working it with practiced grace. This is the birthplace of faluda, the ancient Persian frozen dessert that somehow survived centuries and still makes modern ice cream look like an amateur invention. The mixture glistens under the shade, threads of rice noodles tangled with syrup and ice, touched by a pink hue from rosewater. Someone sprinkles in lime juice, another adds ground pistachios. You can't help but grin. So that's it, you whisper. Desert refrigeration wasn't just science, it was dessert science. The Persians didn't invent sweetness, but they might have perfected its performance. Faluda, or falude as it's known locally, dates back at least 2,000 years. It's often called the world's oldest known cold dessert still eaten today. You imagine it being served at royal banquets, gleaming bowls of frost and perfume carried by servants to noble guests who gasped at the sight. Ice wasn't just cooling, it was glamour. You watch as they pour syrup made of sugar and rosewater, sometimes flavored with cherry, saffron, or sour lime. The rice noodles, boiled and cooled beforehand, are mixed with the crushed ice, turning into a crystalline tangle of texture. Each bite would melt slow and bright, a perfect balance of sweet and sharp. And to think, it all depended on the yakchal's patience, on the ice hauled across deserts by sleepless traders. You can almost taste it, the gentle sting of cold after hours in the heat, the burst of floral sweetness. You close your eyes and sigh. Not bad for 400 BCE. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Persian faluda eventually spread westward into India and the Middle East, inspiring versions like kulfi, sherbet, and even early Italian sorbetto. When you eat ice cream today, you're essentially tasting Persia's cool legacy in a waffle cone. Scholars often trace the word sorbet back to the Persian sharbat, meaning sweet drink. The Persian Empire didn't just trade goods, it traded sensations. The courtyard hums with soft conversation. You glance around, the walls are plastered in pale clay, the air faintly shimmering from reflected heat. A servant fans the mixture slowly with a palm frond, because apparently even dessert deserves a gentle breeze. A small boy sneaks a spoonful and gets shooed away by laughter. You grin again. Human nature hasn't changed much. Historians still argue whether faluda was invented for royal indulgence or common survival. Some claim it began as a noble's luxury, iced syrup designed to flaunt wealth and power.
Others believe it originated with humble traders who used leftover ice to preserve fruit syrup during long journeys. Both versions have merit, and maybe both are true. Like most good things, it probably started as necessity and became art. You step closer to a low marble table where another concoction is being prepared. Sherbet, a syrupy drink made with snow, fruit juice, and herbs. Mint, tamarind, pomegranate, each variation a lesson in refreshment. These sherbets were so beloved that travelers from Greece to India wrote about them for centuries. The Persian word sharbet would one day drift into Ottoman courts, then Renaissance kitchens, until it found its way to European tongues as sorbet. It's wild to think that your modern dessert menu still speaks Persian. A woman in a white headscarf stirs a pot of syrup beside you, smiling faintly without looking up. You can tell she knows this craft by instinct, the right texture, the right chill, the perfect bloom of fragrance. You wonder if her ancestors once did the same under starlight, waiting for the ice caravans to arrive before starting the day's sweets. There's a gentle rhythm to this scene, the scrape of ice, the splash of syrup, the soft hum of voices. It's both ordinary and extraordinary, proof that civilization doesn't just build empires, it builds comforts. You take another step back, letting your eyes trace the delicate patterns painted on the clay jars nearby. Lotus flowers, geometric spirals, the eternal symbols of balance. You find one jar labeled with faded ink, golab, meaning rosewater. The scent wafts up, dizzying in its sweetness. The Persians adored rosewater. They used it in cooking, medicine, and even rituals. There's a story, possibly exaggerated but too charming to ignore, that Alexander the Great, after conquering Persia, was introduced to rosewater baths and became instantly obsessed. You chuckle picturing a battle-hardened general lounging in petals, mumbling, "Don't tell the men." Another fringe tidbit, some scholars think rosewater ice wasn't just culinary, but medicinal. Ancient Persian texts describe cold desserts prescribed to balance internal heat, especially in summer. In their holistic system of medicine, foods had temperaments, hot, cold, moist, or dry, and maintaining balance was key to health. Falude, with its cooling ice and calming rose, was practically therapy. You could say it was the world's first edible air conditioner with a side of aerotherapy. You lean against a pillar, enjoying the faint cool of the shade. The smell of syrup lingers thick in the air, blending with dust and wood smoke. You can almost hear the murmur of 1,000 forgotten kitchens, each one chasing that same fleeting perfection, a moment of cold on the tongue before it melts away. Historians still argue whether ice desserts were served publicly or remained confined to palaces. Some ruins near Yazd suggest public cooling houses, spaces where people could gather to share chilled drinks and socialize during hot months. Imagine an ancient Persian cafe culture, minus the Wi-Fi, but with way better air circulation. You picture yourself sitting there with them, cross-legged on woven mats, sipping icy sherbet while listening to a poet recite verses under lantern light. The heat outside forgotten, time slowing to the rhythm of spoons scraping ice. Maybe that's what these desserts really did. They bought people a few moments of peace in a harsh world. You glance again at the falude being served. Someone offers you a small bowl, and for a second you hesitate, because it feels almost sacred to eat something that connects so directly to history. Then you take it, spoon trembling slightly, and taste. The cold hits first, sharp and clean, then the sweetness, layered and floral, then the lime, bright enough to wake you up. You close your eyes and, for a heartbeat, the centuries collapse. You're there, royal guest, traveler, commoner, it doesn't matter. You're part of that same sigh of relief. You whisper, this is how they tamed the desert. Because it wasn't enough to survive the heat. They wanted to enjoy the chill. The laughter continues around you,
Children darting between shadows, the air alive with clinking cups and soft conversation. You know this won't last. The ice will melt, the day will get hotter. But that's the beauty of it. The sweetness was always temporary. That's what made it precious. You linger a little longer, letting the last shards of ice melt on your tongue. Somewhere, a musician begins to play a slow tune on a ney flute, the notes curling upward like smoke. The desert beyond the walls shimmers, waiting for its turn to reclaim the cool. But not yet, for now, in this courtyard, Persia wins again. You step away from the courtyard of syrup and rosewater, down a narrow passage that smells of clay and sun-baked dust. The laughter fades behind you, replaced by the low thrum of work, chisels, pulleys, and human breath sinking with the grind of stone. You've entered the realm of builders now, the architects of chill, the ones who made impossible physics look like simple devotion. The Yakcha wasn't just a clay dome in the desert, it was a statement. Every curve, every brick, every vent whispered precision. You tilt your head back to take in the massive structure again, its domed body gleaming pale gold under the daylight, its base partly buried beneath the sand. It looks soft, almost organic, like a beehive that grew straight out of the earth. But step closer, and you can feel the intelligence in every line. You reach out to touch a brick. It's cool, surprisingly so despite the merciless sun. The surface has that faintly porous texture of a material designed to breathe. The builders called it sarouge, a special waterproof mixture of clay, sand, lime, ash, goat hair, and egg whites. Yes, egg whites. Even the omelets contributed to engineering. The blend sealed heat out and let moisture escape, making the walls both sweat-proof and heat-proof. You can almost imagine the recipe written down like a spell. Mix earth, fire, and life until they resist the desert itself. A laborer nearby gestures toward the dome and grins at you. You can tell he's proud, and he should be. Some of these structures have survived over 1,000 years, still standing with minimal decay. Ancient Persian engineers didn't just build for utility, they built for eternity. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The word Yakchal literally means ice pit. It combined a deep subterranean storage chamber with a towering conical superstructure that caught cool air and expelled warm air through a system of natural ventilation. Even in 40 degrees Celsius heat, the inside temperature could stay close to freezing. Think of it as passive refrigeration, centuries before Freon or compressors were even ideas. You walk around to the shaded side of the dome where a row of narrow chimneys punctuates the slope. Air flows through them, rising and falling in careful choreography. The architects used principles of thermodynamics long before the term existed. Dense cold air sinking, hot air rising, airflow induced by pressure differentials. They'd learned from observation, not equations. You can picture them sitting at dusk, watching wind ripple through reeds, thinking, what if we built that into a wall? The lead builder, an older man with hands like carved wood, approaches you. He squints against the light and gestures toward a long trench leading away from the structure. You follow him to its edge, peering into what looks like a dry canal. This is part of the Qanat system, the subterranean aqueducts that delivered water from mountain springs miles away. They fed not only farms and cities, but also the Yakchals. Every component in this network was intentional, symphonic. Here's a fringe tidbit for you. Some ancient blueprints suggest that Persian builders aligned Yakchals using stellar navigation, their domes positioned to optimize shade and wind flow according to the stars. It's part geometry, part astrology, part pure audacity. You can almost hear the conversation, should we check the compass? No need, Orion's rising, we're good. You crouch and scoop up a handful of the desert soil nearby. It's powdery and pale, yet this dust gave rise to the most enduring cold storage system on Earth. Historians still argue whether the Yakchal design emerged entirely in Persia or drew inspiration from older Egyptian granaries or Babylonian cooling pits. The truth might lie somewhere in the trade routes, ideas traveling silently with spices and silk. The sun climbs higher and shadows sharpen around you.
The workers climb up scaffolds, laying bricks with careful rhythm. Each layer narrows inward, forming that distinctive cone shape. There's a logic to it. The steep slope minimizes sunlight exposure while maximizing airflow. The interior, meanwhile, sinks deep underground, where Earth's own chill takes over. You realize you're looking at an equation written in clay and sweat, a 3D manifesto against entropy. You walk inside the half-finished dome. The temperature drops immediately. The air smells faintly of lime and dust, but it's comfortable. A few candles flicker, their flames barely trembling. The acoustics are eerie. Your footsteps echo like whispers from beneath the ground. For a second, you almost feel like you're inside a lung, the whole structure breathing slowly around you. Someone drops a tool outside and the sound reverberates upward through the hollow cone. You shiver. There's something deeply human about this space, built to store something fragile, fleeting. Ice, dessert, preservation, but maybe also memory. You watch as a mason smooths the interior wall with a wide brush, coating it in a thin layer of ceruge. His movements are slow, almost meditative. Another worker hums a tune under his breath, a song about snow on the mountains, maybe, or the river that brings the ice home. These aren't nameless laborers in your mind anymore. They're artisans, dreamers. Without them, kings would have no sherbet to sip, no symbol of luxury to flaunt. One of the builders looks over and calls something out that makes everyone laugh. You don't understand the words, but from the gestures, it's clearly a joke about how their yakchal will outlast the king himself. You grin. Eternal architecture has its own sense of humor. You move to the back of the chamber where a deep pit opens into darkness, the actual ice vault. It descends more than 6 meters below ground, lined with the same water-resistant plaster. At the bottom, a thin layer of straw covers the floor. The workers will pack the winter ice here, alternating it with layers of insulation until the entire pit becomes a frozen time capsule. You can picture it months from now, filled with glittering blocks stacked like treasure. As you climb back toward the entrance, a breeze slides down from the vents above and kisses your cheek. The sensation is instant relief. Cool, clean, astonishing. You stop walking and just breathe, letting it flow over you. You could swear the air hums softly, like it's pleased to be noticed. You remember the foule day from earlier, the melting sweetness on your tongue, and realize this place made that moment possible. Without these domes and trenches, without these equations written in mud, no dessert could survive the desert. It's humbling. The math of pleasure depends on the physics of patience. You step out into sunlight again, blinking hard. The dome looms behind you, massive and calm. You can almost hear it whisper through the wind, "I will outlive your machines." And it's true. Before you go, one of the builders offers you a jug of cool water drawn from a shaded pit nearby. You take a sip. It's cold, startlingly cold. He grins, proud again. You both look up at the yakchal, that silent triumph of logic and faith. It's not just a structure, it's a promise that even here, where heat devours everything, human hands can make frost endure. You glance toward the horizon, where the dunes ripple like molten gold. Somewhere beyond them, more domes rise from the earth, each one an echo of this same idea: control, beauty, survival. The Persians didn't build refrigerators, they built cathedrals of temperature. And as the wind shifts, carrying a hint of coolness over your skin, you think, maybe that's what all great architecture is. Not walls, not roofs, not decoration, but defiance shaped into shade.
You wander further down the dusty path, leaving behind the rhythmic scrape of brick and mortar. The city hums softly in the afternoon heat, but something in the air has changed. You can sense a tension, an undercurrent of hierarchy and ambition woven into the very breeze. You're about to step into the cool, shadowed halls where ice becomes power, where luxury transforms into politics. At first, it's subtle. You notice the servants rushing across courtyards with covered trays, their feet silent on sun-baked stone. A few carry slender silver cups, beating faint droplets of condensation. Others whisper as they pass, for the satrap's feast tonight. You catch the glint of something crystalline beneath one cloth and realize that's ice. You feel the irony immediately. Here you are, in one of the hottest regions on Earth, and someone's about to use frozen water as a political statement. You follow the trail into a palace compound lined with cedar beams and tiled mosaics. Inside, the temperature drops. The walls are thick, the corridors dim. At the center sits a long banquet hall, its air perfumed with incense and something sharper, rose, perhaps, or chilled wine. A musician strums a gentle melody. At the head of the hall, a nobleman reclines on silk cushions, his rings catching the light. You don't know his name, but you know his type, the kind who turns refrigeration into reputation. A servant approaches him with a golden bowl filled with pale slivers of ice floating in sweet pomegranate syrup. The noble lifts the bowl slowly, watching the condensation trickle down its side like proof of divine favor. "Only the chosen," he murmurs, and takes a sip. You can almost hear the sigh ripple down the table, a collective reminder that coldness isn't just a comfort here, it's authority. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Achaemenid and later Sasanian periods, ice and cold desserts became luxury items in royal courts. They symbolized command over nature itself. When kings of Persia dined on faladeh or sherbet while their enemies sweltered, it wasn't just indulgence, it was propaganda. To control cold in a desert empire was to prove you had mastered not only men, but the elements. One official nearby makes a toast, his voice resonating. "To the king who commands both fire and frost." Everyone applauds. You sip from an imaginary cup, half amused, half awed. It's absurd and brilliant all at once, turning physics into politics, dessert into diplomacy. And here comes your fringe tidbit. There are scattered tales, mostly from later poets and travelers, that certain royal decrees demanded blocks of mountain ice be sent as tribute to the capital during summer. Imagine that. An empire measured not only in taxes and soldiers, but in kilograms of frost. If a governor's shipment melted en route, it could be read as an omen of disfavor, or worse, incompetence. Bureaucracy with ice cubes. You almost laugh, but the thought chills you in a different way. Historians still argue whether these stories of ice tribute were literal or symbolic. Some say they represent the wealth of irrigation and control of natural resources, not actual frozen deliveries. Others believe the records are genuine, that Persians really did send snow packed in straw through the desert. Considering how precise their yakchals were, maybe it's not so far-fetched. You linger by a colonnade overlooking the courtyard. Below, servants fan a pool of water to keep it cool, while others sprinkle petals across the surface. Every motion feels deliberate, ceremonial. The pool mirrors the sky, broken only by the slow ripples of breeze. And for a moment, you understand the philosophy of it all. Coolness wasn't just physical, it was moral. To remain calm, composed, unflustered in the heat of life was the mark of nobility. Warm-blooded passion was for peasants. Cool restraint was for rulers. You watch the nobleman again, his expression unreadable as he lifts another spoonful of faladeh. You imagine the message sent by that gesture. "I can have winter whenever I want." You can almost hear him say it. But politics always melts eventually. You glance toward a group of scholars seated near the back of the hall, their robes dusty from travel. They're murmuring, debating quietly, likely about the new canal project or the ethics of using slaves in yakchal construction. One of them slams his fist gently on the table and says something that makes the others lean closer. You can't catch every word, but one phrase stands out. What happens when the ice runs out? The question hangs in the air like a cool draft.
You smile faintly. Some debates never age. The music shifts, a softer tune now, slower, almost wistful. You follow the sound through an open doorway into the palace gardens. The air smells of orange blossoms and wet stone. In the corner, a young woman tends to a basin of clear water, dropping petals one by one. She looks up, eyes curious, and gestures for you to listen. The basin makes a faint ringing sound as the petals hit the surface. That, she says, in a voice like silk, is how you know the water's cold enough. You ask her who she is, and she smiles. A gardener. Or maybe a scientist, she laughs quietly. In Persia, it's the same thing. She tells you that the royal gardens were more than decoration, they were temperature machines. The arrangement of trees, the direction of water channels, the placement of walls, all calculated to produce shade and airflow. The great gardens of Pasargadae and later Isfahan were masterpieces of environmental engineering disguised as beauty. She scoops up a handful of cold water and lets it fall back into the pool. Every drop we move, she says, makes life possible here. You think back to the workers at the Yakchal, their laughter echoing across the sand. The same intelligence, the same ingenuity runs through this place too, just polished, perfumed, political. The king may claim the glory, but the science belongs to everyone beneath him. The gardener offers you a small bowl of chilled fruit slices, melons, figs, grapes. You bite into one, and the cold juice floods your mouth. It's nothing extravagant, but it feels like luxury all the same. Even the poor, she says, deserve a cool breeze sometimes. You nod, understanding her unspoken meaning. Power hoards cold, but life always finds a way to borrow it. She stands, brushes her hands on her robe, and glances toward the palace. They think the Yakchal makes them gods, but the gods never built one themselves, she says softly. You watch her disappear into the shaded path, her words echoing. The palace behind you gleams with wealth and artifice, but you know the truth now. The politics of Chill was always built on the backs of those who mixed clay, hauled ice, and carved tunnels through rock. Kings might toast with sherbet, but the people, the builders, the gardeners, are the real architects of coolness. You take one last look at the grand hall, where the nobleman now laughs too loudly, his bowl empty, the ice already melting into syrup. The servants rush to refill it, pretending not to notice. Power, it seems, always demands to be refreshed. The music fades, and the scent of rosewater drifts past you again, familiar and haunting. You turn away, stepping back into sunlight. The heat hits you hard, but you carry a piece of that coldness with you. Knowledge, maybe, or perspective. The politics of Chill never truly ended. It just changed its wardrobe. And as you walk, you whisper to yourself, half amused, half reverent. In the desert, power isn't about fire. It's about who keeps their ice the longest.
The path narrows, the air thick with heat again. You move away from the palaces of polished stone and slip toward the outskirts, where the city begins to crumble into quiet sand. Out here, the voices fade, replaced by the low whisper of wind sliding over the dunes. You follow the sound of trickling water, impossible in this place, until you find a small opening in the earth. A stairway spirals down, cool breath rising from below like a sigh. You pause, brush sand from the steps, and descend. The light fades fast. After a dozen steps, you're wrapped in shadow and dampness. The air smells of minerals, wet clay, and something ancient, older than empire, older than stone. You can feel it before you see it, cold, silent, patient. Beneath your feet lies the Quinacht, the hidden bloodstream of Persia. You reach the bottom and step into a low tunnel. It stretches into darkness, wide enough for one person to crouch and walk. You can hear the faint rush of underground water sliding through stone channels, guided perfectly by slope and gravity. No pumps, no machines, just geometry and time. The Persians mastered this network thousands of years ago, carving life directly into the bones of the desert. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Quinault system, a series of gently sloping underground canals, was invented in ancient Persia around the first millennium BCE. It allowed water from mountain aquifers to travel for miles underground, emerging at wells and oases without losing much to evaporation. Even the Romans later copied the idea. Without quinauts, cities like Yazd or Kerman would have been impossible. You kneel beside the water and dip your fingers in. It's icy cold. You realize this is the secret, the invisible half of the Yakchal's magic. The domes and vents you saw above were only the face. This, the veins beneath, was what kept the empire breathing. As you walk deeper, the walls narrow. Lanterns flicker every few meters. Someone still maintains this place. You catch glimpses of names scratched into the clay, builders, families, dates. The handwriting grows older the farther you go. It's like reading a timeline carved by hands that never saw sunlight. You stop at a small chamber, half flooded, and crouch to look closer. The walls glisten with mineral deposits that sparkle faintly in your light. This space once stored ice, or maybe grain, or maybe secrets. The air is dense with quiet. You whisper something, just to hear it bounce back, and the echo returns slow and low, like the cave itself is answering. A laugh would sound strange here. You try one anyway. The sound breaks the stillness, but then fades, swallowed whole. You shiver, not from cold, but from the weight of centuries pressing close. There's a fringe tidbit that floats to mind. Some locals still believe certain quinauts are guarded by spirits, dives or jinn, who punish those who pollute the water. It's not so much superstition as reverence. Water was sacred here. To harm it was to offend the land itself. A few old builders even carved protective symbols, tiny sunbursts and eyes into the tunnel walls to keep evil away. You run your hand over one, tracing its worn edges. Protection, persistence, poetry, hidden beneath the sand. Historians still argue whether quinauts were purely Persian inventions, or if earlier civilizations, maybe in Oman or Mesopotamia, experimented with similar ideas. But in Persia, they became art. There are still functioning quinauts today, some over 2,000 years old, still feeding farms, still cooling homes, still whispering the same steady music of flowing water. You follow the sound toward another chamber, this one vast and hollow. Your light widens, and there it is, a subterranean ice vault. The air is shockingly cold, your breath visible. The floor is smooth and slightly damp, marked by old straw impressions. This is where they stored ice for months, packed in layers of insulation hauled down from the surface. The geometry of the room, the way it curves, the way the ceiling vents are angled, still regulates temperature even now. You press your hand to the wall. It's cool, as if the stone itself remembers winter. You imagine the scene centuries ago, workers descending with torches, stacking gleaming blocks of ice under the dim light, their voices echoing off the walls, laughter mixing with exhaustion. The overseer checking every layer, every vent. When the vault was full, they'd seal it, whisper a prayer to keep the cold alive through the long summer. You wonder if any of them ever sneaked a handful of snow for themselves. You hope they did. You step further in until your footsteps fade into near silence. The air feels heavy here, dense with invisible weight.
You realize this is the true genius of the system, the inversion of expectation. Above ground, the sun blazed; here underfoot, winter waited. Persia's greatest engineering wasn't about building tall, it was about digging deep. And then you spot something odd near the far wall, a small alcove, half collapsed, its entrance blocked by debris. You clear it gently, revealing a tiny carved niche, an offering space. Inside, you find fragments of pottery and what looks like dried petals, long turned to dust. Someone, centuries ago, left flowers for the ice. You can't help but smile. It's so human, to make something purely practical, then give it a soul anyway. You sit for a while in that cold quiet, listening to the underground water hum through the quinault. The sound is hypnotic, steady, eternal. You could almost fall asleep to it. Your thoughts drift toward how fragile this system was, dependent on endless maintenance, cooperation, and care. The ice may have been for kings, but the cold itself belonged to everyone, the shepherd, the farmer, the mason. The water united them all. You think back to the royal gardens, to the flooded vendors, to the builders who joked their domes would outlast kings. They were all connected by this unseen web of tunnels. Every bowl of sherbet, every rosewater bath, every sigh of relief on the scorching afternoon, all of it started here, underground. You tilt your head and catch a faint gust moving through the vent above. It's slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The air smells faintly of salt and earth. You close your eyes and imagine the ice melting droplet by droplet over generations. Time doesn't destroy this place, it only softens it. When you finally rise to leave, you touch the wall one last time. The stone is still cool against your palm. You think, this is how they won, not by fighting the desert, but by befriending it, by learning its moods, its patterns, its patience. You climb the winding stairs back toward light. Each step feels warmer, louder, closer to the surface world again. When you finally emerge, the evening sun blinds you for a moment. The dunes glow bronze, the city a silhouette on the horizon. You take a deep breath. The air tastes dry but alive. Somewhere beneath your feet, the quinaults still flow, still whisper, still work. You can almost hear them saying, "We're still here. We've been cooling this world longer than your machines have been humming." And maybe, if you listen closely enough, you'll hear a final echo rising through the vents, a laugh, a sigh, the rustle of ancient petals, the sound of civilization keeping itself from melting.
You stand on the ridge above Yazd, watching the desert fade into twilight. The last rays of sun spill gold over the dunes, and the horizon hums with the low throb of modern life, cars, engines, distant generators. You exhale and wonder if the ancient Persians would laugh or weep at how much noise humanity now makes just to keep itself cool. A soft breeze brushes your face. It smells faintly of dust and metal, like air from a new world layered over the bones of the old one. You turn slowly and spot something unusual in the city below. A low, square building with a curious roofline, half solar panels, half ancient dome. Its walls shimmer with beige plaster, shaped almost like the yakchals you saw earlier. You squint and smile. The past hasn't vanished, it's being reassembled. As you make your way down the path, the noise grows sharper. Voices, laughter, the faint hum of electric fans. A group of architecture students is gathered near the building, sketchbooks open, measuring angles. You step closer, and one of them looks up and grins. "You came at the right time," she says. "We're testing the air ducts." She gestures toward the roof where slender wind towers, bagders, catch the evening breeze and funnel it downward. You walk inside, and it hits you instantly. The temperature drop. Even in the fading heat, the air inside feels several degrees cooler. No compressors, no refrigerant, just design. The space smells of fresh clay, lime plaster, and ozone from the solar batteries. This, she explains, is a passive cooling house, inspired by the old Persian yakcha. We're trying to adapt their methods for modern eco-housing. You grin, genuinely impressed. You half expect to see an ice pit underfoot, but instead there's a shallow water basin reflecting soft LED lights. Evaporative cooling, she says. Same principle as the yakchal's airflow. Hot air rises, cool air sinks. The water helps stabilize temperature. The walls even use Saroj-like composite. You run your hand along the wall. It's smooth and cool to the touch, modern materials imitating ancient genius. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Several 21st century architects and engineers have indeed revived Persian cooling designs for sustainable construction. Wind catchers, thermal chimneys, and thick adobe insulation have been integrated into eco-buildings from Iran to California to the UAE. The Masdar City project in Abu Dhabi, for example, borrows directly from the wind tower system that Persians perfected thousands of years ago. The student laughs softly. We used to think ancient meant primitive. Now we realize they were just using energy better than we do. She points at a digital monitor on the wall showing interior temperature. It's 32 degrees C outside and 22 degrees C in here, all without electricity. You chuckle. So, what you're saying is the Persians invented green tech before it was cool. She rolls her eyes but smiles anyway. Exactly. You wander deeper into the building, your footsteps echoing faintly. The walls curve inward, funneling air and soft currents. You feel the faint pull of physics at work, the whisper of balance restored. It's almost poetic. The same wind that once cooled Faluda now flows past solar panels and sensor arrays. Then comes your fringe tidbit. Some experimental designers in modern Iran and India have started using phase-change materials, special waxes and salts that store and release heat like ice does to recreate the old yakchal's effect in small portable systems. A few startups even brand them as modern ice houses. It's strange, you think, how technology loops back on itself, centuries apart, yet chasing the same promise: how to keep things cool in a burning world. Historians still argue whether ancient Persian design philosophy was more about aesthetics or pure survival. Some call it functional art, beauty born from necessity. Others insist it was pragmatic engineering that just happened to look elegant. You suspect it was both. When you have to build against the desert, form and function naturally fall in love. You stop beside a display board showing diagrams of old and new cooling systems. The sketches look familiar: domes, channels, vents, qanats. But next to them are heat maps, airflow simulations, and digital readouts. It's the same song in a different key. You feel a sudden pang of admiration, maybe even tenderness for the ancient architects who worked by instinct, not data. They'd probably grin at these computer models and say, "We told you so." Outside, the students start laughing again. They're holding cups of Faluda from a nearby cafe, modern plastic containers, but the same tangled sweetness inside. You can't resist joining them. One offers you a spoon, and as the icy noodles melt on your tongue, it's impossible not to think about how this taste survived millennia. Ice, rosewater, lime, and patience, it's the same formula. The continuity feels electric, alive. One student says between bites, "We're trying to build a full-scale yakchal for next year, solar-assisted but traditional materials." Another adds, "We want to show people it still works. No air conditioners, no waste, just clever geometry." You nod approvingly. "A revolution powered by triangles," you joke, and they laugh. The sun finally dips, leaving a lavender haze over the dunes. Lights flicker on across the city, yellow, orange, white. You can almost see the ghosts of ancient domes under the street lamps, each one breathing quietly through the centuries. The breeze cools your skin. You look at the horizon and imagine the arc of history like a slow pendulum swinging from clay to silicon, from hand-mixed plaster to smart materials. What changes isn't the need, it's the arrogance of thinking we're the first to solve it. Someone turns on a small speaker and soft music drifts through the room. Modern Persian jazz, lilting and hypnotic. The melody reminds you of the knee flute you heard in the courtyard during the Faluda scene centuries ago. The continuity startles you again. So much changes, yet the rhythm stays. The wind, the notes, the sweetness, they all travel. You take another spoonful of dessert and glance at the digital thermostat glowing faint blue. 22 degrees. Perfect. You murmur, the ancients would approve. You think of those old builders in the desert, squinting at stars to align their domes, mixing saroge with bare hands and stacking ice in silence. Without them, none of this, none of your comfort would exist. And maybe that's the truest kind of immortality. Not through monuments or thrones, but through temperature, through the subtle inheritance of cool air. You walk outside as the night deepens. The city hums faintly beneath the stars, and somewhere a fan turns lazily beside an open window. You can almost hear the Yakchals breathing again, their invisible wisdom threading through the modern skyline. The students wave goodbye, their laughter fading into the dark. You take one last look back at the dome-shaped building. The wind towers catch the breeze, their shadows stretching long and thin across the sand. They look like antennas reaching for something ancient, something eternal. And you realize the secret wasn't just how the Persians cooled dessert in the desert. It was how they taught humanity to listen, to the wind, to the earth, to patience. You whisper into the warm air, half prayer, half promise. May we remember how to stay cool, not just in body, but in mind. Night drapes the desert in velvet, and the city below twinkles like scattered gemstones. You step onto a quiet terrace, letting the breeze brush your face. It carries the faint scent of clay, rosewater, and distant spices. Somewhere beneath the surface, qanats hum softly, moving water like veins through the sand. You feel it. Time folded in layers, centuries whispering their secrets through temperature and design. The terrace is empty, except for a low table covered with bowls of falude and glasses of chilled sherbet. You pick up a spoon, letting the cold threads of noodles tangle across your tongue. Sweet, floral, icy. Each bite a miniature time machine. You close your eyes, imagining ancient hands scraping ice from mountains, wrapping it in straw, hauling it across the desert under starlight. It's incredible the lengths humans went to create brief moments of relief, beauty, and pleasure. You lean back and watch the wind sweep across the sand. A modern fan hums lazily in the corner, trying to compete with centuries of ingenuity. It's almost funny. Thousands of years of engineering, architecture, and science distilled into a single gust of cooled air. You feel a soft satisfaction knowing that while the tools have changed, the principles remain timeless. Historians still argue about many details, the exact methods of ice transport, the social hierarchy of ice traders, even the real origins of some Yakchal designs. Some say the knowledge was a closely guarded royal secret. Others claim communities shared techniques openly, adapting to their unique landscapes. Either way, the ingenuity is undeniable. Ice became a currency of power, a symbol of luxury, and a foundation for civilization itself. A faint melody drifts from the city below, someone playing a ney flute, reminiscent of what you heard long ago near the Falude courtyard. The notes curl upward, intertwining with the wind, soft as a whispered memory. You lean forward, listening, imagining the same melody echoing through ancient Yakchals and palace gardens, carrying the ghosts of builders, servants, and kings alike. You take a moment to trace the domed silhouette of a Yakchal against the starry sky. The design is simple, yet genius. A conical roof, underground storage, channels for airflow, insulation layers. Each feature speaks of observation, experimentation, and necessity. The desert is harsh, but the Persians mastered it, not by conquering, but by cooperating with nature. The wind shifts, and you feel the cool air move over your skin, brushing past the edges of the terrace like a reminder. You remember the ice caravans, the courtyards of suites, the underground qanats, the modern students recreating ancient cooling systems. Each thread weaves together into a tapestry of persistence and ingenuity. You realize that refrigeration in the desert wasn't just about dessert. It was about human creativity, resilience, and the quiet, almost sacred joy of making life better, one block of ice at a time. Fringe tails surface. Some suggest small yakchals were used for experimental medicinal cooling. Others hint that religious rituals once included ice offerings. You smile at the absurdity, the poetry. Every layer of history carries both the practical and the magical, the measurable and the imagined. You sip from a glass of chilled rosewater. The air cools your cheeks, the stars overhead pulse faintly against the dark sky. For a moment, everything slows. The wind, the distant flute, the laughter from below, the soft clink of ice and syrup. You feel the continuum of time and effort, the persistence of human hands shaping comfort, delight, and ingenuity against the relentless desert. The terrace quiets, the night deepens, and your mind drifts across centuries of frost, stone, and sweat. You smile softly. You've walked with the builders, sipped with kings, wandered through tunnels, and tasted the fruits of their patience. The desert may be relentless, but so is human imagination. And tonight, it has carried you across millennia, from mountain snow to courtyard suites, from subterranean vaults to modern sustainable homes. You lean back, letting the cold and dark wrap around you, a final, gentle embrace. The stars above, the wind below, the memory of ice and dessert, everything whispers that ingenuity, curiosity, and patience endure. You exhale slowly, letting the desert carry away your heat and worry. And finally, you whisper to the night, to the ice, to the ghosts of builders past and present. Thank you for teaching me how to keep cool in every way that matters.
The desert night stretches infinitely, softening the edges of the world around you. The sand glows silver under a sky scattered with stars, each one a distant witness to centuries of human ingenuity. You sink slowly onto the terrace floor, letting the cool stone beneath you draw the lingering heat from your body. The breeze whispers over your skin, carrying faint hints of rosewater and jasmine from distant gardens, mingling with the dry scent of desert earth. You close your eyes and let your mind drift back through the journey. The ice caravans winding beneath starlit skies, the yakkalas with their secretive domes and subterranean vaults, the falude sweetly melting on your tongue. All of it flows together in a slow, gentle rhythm. Each memory is a thread, weaving together a tapestry of patience, creativity, and the subtle mastery of nature. It's almost musical. The hum of water through qanats, the soft scrape of ice against bronze, the quiet murmur of distant wind. The world seems to pause around you. The heat that once pressed down now feels distant, irrelevant. Time itself stretches, folding in on itself like a sand dune. You think of the ancient builders, their hands raw and steady, of the traders guarding blocks of ice across blazing deserts, of kings savoring sweetness as proof of their dominion. And yet, in all of this, you recognize a shared humanity. The desire to create comfort, to defy harshness with elegance, to find joy and beauty, even in the fiercest conditions. Your senses soften. The taste of syrup, the smell of clay and rose, the touch of cool stone. Each one a quiet echo of the ingenuity that shaped these lands. You realize that the cold was never just physical. It was symbolic, a testament to patience, resourcefulness, and care. Every block of ice, every carefully designed vent, every drop of water in a connaught carries a story of persistence against time and environment. The stars wheel slowly overhead, and the desert exhales around you. You feel the world's vastness and the delicate touch of human effort within it. The air hums softly, as if acknowledging your presence and the presence of all who came before. You take a deep breath, letting it fill your lungs with the cool night, feeling the calm sink deep into your bones. As the wind whispers through the dunes and the soft music of history fades into the night, you allow yourself to fully relax, knowing that ingenuity, patience, and wonder endure. The journey through frost, stone, and sweetness leaves a quiet reassurance. Human curiosity and determination can temper even the harshest of deserts. And now, as you lie back, the world serene and hushed, you surrender to the cool, the dark, and the gentle rhythm of the desert night.